At dawn on the 7th of October, 1571, the sea off western Greece looked harmless enough to deceive the dying. Blue water, open sky, clean light over the Gulf of Lepanto. But by noon, the Ionian had become a slaughterhouse so dense with wreckage, corpses, and blood that men later swore you could cross parts of it stepping from ship to ship without wetting your boots. Around 40,000 men would die in roughly 4 hours. That is not a battle in the ordinary sense. That is a violent convulsion of civilizations compressed into a single morning. The Ottoman Empire, the most feared power in the Mediterranean against the Holy League, a brittle Christian coalition so full of mutual hatred that only weeks earlier its own soldiers had been stabbing each other in the streets of Messina. On paper, this should not have worked. The Christian alliance was politically unstable, operationally awkward, and commanded by a man only 24 years old, a royal bastard with blood ambition and almost no naval command experience, equal to the scale of the moment. Yet history does not always reward the stable. Sometimes it rewards the side that understands one thing with greater clarity than the other side can bear to admit. There are moments when retreat means the end of an entire world. At Lepanto, both fleets sailed into that realization. To understand why the men aboard those galleys fought with such inhuman desperation, you have to begin not with strategy, but with memory. The Christian rage filling the benches and decks of the Holy League did not come from abstract patriotism or pious slogans alone. It came from Famagusta. Earlier that year on Cyprus, after a savage Ottoman siege, the Venetian defenders surrendered under terms that should have guaranteed safe passage. Military honor, even in a brutal age, still claimed certain limits. But the Ottoman commander Lala Mustafa Pasha decided that terror would be more useful than honor. The Venetian governor Marco Antonio Bragadin was mutilated first. Ears cut, nose cut, humiliation staged in slow movement. Then came the real message. He was flayed alive, skin peeled from living flesh in a ritual of calculated cruelty, designed not merely to kill, but to redefine what surrender itself would mean in future Christian minds. His skin was stuffed with straw dressed and paraded as mockery. That image traveled west faster than fleets. By the time the Holy League sailed, every man who had heard the story understood the same thing. If the Ottoman line held, and if the Christian line broke, there would be no bargaining after defeat, no comfortable captivity for officers, no civilized exchange. There would only be the long, inventive cruelty of conquerors who wanted memory itself weaponized. That is why Lepanto became absolute. Not just victory or defeat, salvation or slow annihilation. And yet, the Christian side was structurally a mess. That matters because it makes the eventual discipline of their battle line even more impressive. Venetian Spaniards, papal forces, Genoese captains. The Knights of Malta, all packed into one coalition under a common religious banner, but without anything close to emotional unity. Venice feared Spanish dominance almost as much as Ottoman expansion. Spaniards looked down on Italians. Old naval egos, wounded prestige, supply disputes, command disputes. This was the human texture of the Holy League. In Messina, weeks before battle, soldiers had killed one another over insult pay and national resentment. The miracle, if one wants to use that word carefully, is not simply that this alliance fought well at Lepanto. It is that it reached Lepanto still intact enough to fight at all. The force that held it together was not deep trust. It was the will of one young commander, Don John of Austria, illegitimate son of Charles V and half-brother of Philip II of Spain. He had prestige by blood, but prestige is not command. He had to impose command on men older, more experienced, and far less inclined to obey a brilliant youth they considered ornamental. The transcript gets this exactly right. Don John understood that caution would kill the coalition faster than battle. If he allowed delay, mutual suspicion would rot the alliance from within. So he forced decision: sail east, find the Ottoman fleet, fight it wherever it lies. No defensive waiting, no winter hesitation, no dignified retreat into strategy while the alliance quietly dissolves. He marched them into the wolf's mouth because not marching meant the coalition would die before seeing the wolf. Across the water, the Ottoman Admiral Ali Pasha watched the horizon with what should have been confidence. His fleet outnumbered the enemy with around 250 to 300 ships against perhaps 200 in the Holy League. He commanded the most formidable naval arm of the largest Islamic empire on earth. He had elite janissaries on board the finest infantry in the Ottoman world, armed with arquebuses and blades, and drilled into professional violence. He had the weather with him at first. The wind blew from the east, pushing the Ottoman line toward the Christians and forcing the Holy League to labor at the oars against nature. Under ordinary tactical logic, this was exactly what the Ottoman navy wanted. The Christian line advanced heavily slowly with exhausted rowers and stiffened tension. But here, a crucial layer of the story appears. Ali Pasha was not free. Great admirals in great empires are often trapped by men far from the sea. In his pocket, or in his mind at least, he carried a command from Sultan Selim II: do not avoid battle. The honor of the caliphate demanded confrontation. That matters because it explains why Ali Pasha, who had reasonable advisors urging caution when the scale of the Christian fleet became visible, still chose advance over maneuver. He was not simply arrogant, he was politically bound. Ottoman prestige had become part of the tactical equation, and prestige is a dangerous thing when it begins overruling seamanship. Then came the first great reversal of the day, and because history loves moments where men later see providence and meteorology, in the same event, the wind itself changed sides. Around 10 in the morning, as the fleets closed, the easterly wind faded. Then the air turned. A new wind blew from the west. Ottoman sails slackened. Christian sails filled. What had been tactical suffocation for Don John suddenly became momentum. Priests cried miracle. Turks cursed fate. But whatever language men used afterward, the operational consequence was immediate and immense. Don John did not hesitate. He ordered full rowing speed. The alliance that had been dragging itself forward under disadvantage now charged. It is in moments like this that battles cease belonging to plans drafted the night before and begin belonging to whoever understands faster that the universe has briefly opened a door. Don John understood it instantly. Out in front of the Christian line sailed the strangest and in some ways most decisive vessels of the day, the Venetian galleasses. Huge, heavy, awkward-looking things, more like floating fortresses than normal galleys, bristling with artillery on multiple sides. The Ottomans misread them catastrophically. They looked like transport hulks or clumsy cargo ships, too slow to matter, easy prey to be surrounded and boarded. This was the last mistake for many of the men who thought that. As the Turkish vanguard closed, the flanks of these monstrous ships opened and their artillery erupted. Not single shots, a continuous horizontal storm of cannon fire. Wood exploded into splinters that became secondary weapons. Men disappeared under shrapnel iron and flying timbers. Masts shattered, benches collapsed. Within 20 minutes, according to the transcript's dramatic arithmetic, a significant portion of the Ottoman forward line was destroyed, crippled, or thrown into chaos. This is one of the most important tactical moments of Lepanto because it shows how a single technological misreading can infect an entire fleet formation. The Ottoman crescent, elegant in theory, began losing integrity before the main lines even touched. Ships veered to avoid the firing arcs. Gaps opened. Command decisions became reactive instead of dominant. Ali Pasha recovered as best he could by ordering his captains to ignore the galleasses and drive through toward the Christian main line. It was the right adjustment under impossible circumstances. But by then, the first layer of disorder had already entered the Ottoman formation, and battle lines rarely recover their original purity once confusion has entered from the front.
Signal the fleet. Prepare for engagement.
Then the fleets struck. This is one of those rare naval battles where the sea almost ceases to matter, and the ships become a floating continent. Rams crashed. Hulls locked, grappling hooks bit, gangplanks dropped, galleys jammed against one another until much of the battlefield turned into a wooden platform smeared with tar, blood, powder smoke, and splintered rigging. This was not a battle of elegant maneuvers under sail anymore. It was infantry war on unstable boards. Here, the technological contrast between the two sides became crucial. The Ottomans possessed magnificent composite bowmen capable of high rates of fire and trained janissaries aboard their central galleys. Under older conditions, their missile superiority might have massacred slower Christian firearms before reload cycles mattered. But Lepanto was not being fought under older conditions. Many Spanish and Allied Christian soldiers wore steel breastplates, and their ships offered higher parapets. Ottoman arrows, still wounded, still blinded, still killed, exposed men, but not at the decisive rate required to stop advancing armored infantry on packed decks. By contrast, Christian arquebus and heavy gunfire were slow but final. A lead ball does not need elegance. It punches through wood, flesh, bone, and light defensive materials with brutal certainty. This is one reason the boarding fights developed as they did. Ottoman fire was dense. Christian fire was heavier in consequence. A Turk might send 10 arrows into a crowded deck. A Christian arquebusier, when he hit, tended to erase the man he struck. Over time, on these packed decks, that difference accumulated with terrible force. At the center of the whole collision were the two flagships, La Real of Don John and Sultana of Ali Pasha. Here the battle condensed into personal myth and tactical mechanics at once. Don John had made a seemingly strange alteration before battle cutting or shortening the projecting beaks of some Christian prows. Many thought him mad. The ram was a galley's ancient pride. Why mutilate your own ship before collision? The answer emerged in the instant before impact. With the prow shortened, the central bow gun of La Real could be trained lower and fired more directly into the approaching Ottoman ship at the last moment. As Sultana rushed in to ram and board La Real, fired at near point-blank range. The blast tore through the Ottoman bow and forward deck before the Janissaries could fully commit. Yet inertia is merciless. The ships still slammed together, and locked in an embrace, neither side could immediately escape. From that moment on, the battle on the center flagship line ceased to be an admiral's engagement and became a slaughter platform, continuously fed by reserve men from the ships behind. That is one of the grim logistical truths the transcript captures well. These ships did not run out of fighters in the simple sense because smaller galleys behind them kept pouring fresh men aboard. It was a conveyor belt of death. As one front rank fell, another stepped over him. Don John himself, wounded, soaked in blood, not entirely his own, remained visible on deck. Ali Pasha, equally committed, directed his Janissaries with the desperate intensity of a man who understood that if the center failed, the battle's symbolic heart would fail with it. For roughly an hour, neither side truly broke the other. They consumed one another at point-blank range. Meanwhile, on the Christian right, catastrophe nearly undid everything. Gian Andrea Doria, the Genoese admiral, saw what he thought was an Ottoman outflanking movement by the brilliant corsair Uluj Ali, and responded by stretching his formation southward to prevent being turned. It was exactly what Uluj Ali wanted. This was not a lucky gap. It was a manufactured one. Uluj Ali had read Doria's temperament correctly, careful, technical, anxious about geometry, and fed him the one maneuver that would draw him too far from the center. Once the Christian right had been pulled out of alignment, Uluj Ali pivoted sharply and drove through the gap like a knife. This is one of the most tactically brilliant actions of the battle, and it nearly changes history. Suddenly, the Christian flank was exposed. The flagship of the Knights of Malta was isolated, surrounded, and boarded. The knights fought to the last, around 300 of them dying in place, and their sacred banner was torn down and raised upside down aboard an Ottoman ship. Symbolically, this was devastating. If Uluj Ali could now swing inward and hit Don John's center from behind the Christian line, might collapse from its own moment of victory. Among the few desperately trying to plug that breach was a young Spanish soldier who should never have been on deck at all. Feverish, ordered to remain below, too weak by any rational standard to fight, he insisted on rising and taking his place where danger was worst. His name was Miguel de Cervantes. The transcript rightly lingers on him, because Lepanto is one of those moments where the future of literature appears inside the machinery of massacre in the least literary possible way. Cervantes fought and was grievously wounded, his left hand or arm permanently ruined. Yet he remained one more nameless soldier, in a place where thousands were losing more than hands. That matters because Lepanto, like many great battles, did not announce to the men inside it, who among them would later become symbols. On that day, Cervantes was not the author of Don Quixote. He was a sick man refusing to die quietly. The center remained the true hinge. While Uluj Ali threatened disaster on one flank, Don John's struggle aboard La Real reached the point where small decisions became civilizational ones. The Christian commander Santa Cruz, holding reserves, faced an impossible choice. Send help to the collapsing right and perhaps lose the center. Save the center and leave Uluj Ali freer still to widen the disaster. He chose the center. It was a brutal choice and probably the correct one. Fresh Spanish arquebusiers and elite troops poured into the flagship fight from the rear, tipping the balance on the blood-soaked decks, where the Janissaries had been slowly grinding the Christians down. Then came the decisive moment, not as romantic duel, but as crowded violence. Ali Pasha, the Lion of the Sea, was struck down, his head severed and raised on a pike for all to see. That image mattered more than any abstract command transfer. In tightly fought pre-modern battles, the visible death of the supreme commander often functions like a theological event. Men see more than the loss of leadership. They see judgment. The Ottoman center, which had been fighting like a body, still governed by a brain, suddenly lost the brain in full public view. When the Christian banner rose over Sultana, the psychic fracture spread outward through the line. The Ottoman fleet was not mechanically beaten in the same instant, but the belief that sustained it had been stabbed through the throat. And then came the second disaster for the Ottomans, one of the most extraordinary and underappreciated elements of Lepanto, the uprising of the Christian galley slaves. Below decks, chained to benches, around 15,000 Christian rowers had powered the Ottoman fleet under whip and starvation. They could hear the battle changing above them. They could hear Christian cries of victory. They could sense the weakening of their overseers. Across multiple ships almost at once, these men did the only thing history had left them. They revolted. Shackles became weapons. Chains became bludgeons. Overseers were attacked from behind. Men half dead from labor emerged from the holds like revenants, turning Ottoman ships into two front death traps, where Janissaries now had to fight both borders from above and insurgents from below. This is one reason the Ottoman collapse accelerated so violently once the center broke. The fleet was not merely losing command, it was internally decomposing. Still, not every Ottoman commander surrendered to panic. Uluj Ali saw at once what had happened. The center was lost, the left was gone, but he still possessed a coherent fighting group. Any ordinary man might have thrown it into the center in a gesture of heroic loyalty and died nobly. Uluj Ali was a corsair first, and therefore a survivor by instinct and profession. He made the hardest and smartest decision available, save what could still be saved. He took the captured Maltese standard, which might at least preserve some honor, before the Sultan cut loose burdens, abandoned slower prizes, and even some of his own damaged ships, and raced for escape. Santa Cruz pursued, and for a stretch of sea, the battle turned into a hunted withdrawal at the very edge of annihilation. But Uluj Ali got away with perhaps 13 ships, leaving behind the rest of the fleet and most of its dead. That escape matters because it reminds us that even total victories rarely erase every enemy capability. It also meant someone would return to Istanbul fast enough to tell the story from the Ottoman side. When the shooting finally stopped, the battle did not end cleanly. A storm rose. The victorious Christian ships, many shattered and leaking, now faced the possibility of drowning after winning. Under lightning and rain, they crawled toward Patala like wounded animals. And then the post-battle scene turned into one of the grimmest inversions of triumph imaginable. Looting began. Ottoman officers had sewn fortunes into their clothes because they feared their wealth might be confiscated at home if they died far from the center of empire. So the living and the dead alike were cut open for coins. Wealth spilled out of rotting silk. Meanwhile, from the lower holds, the freed Christian rowers emerged one after another into the rain, skeletal men standing upright, perhaps for the first time in years. Around 15,000 of them regained freedom in a single night. Hammers broke chains. Men wept. Some kissed the feet of their liberators. Others barely understood yet what had happened. This was one of the great moral victories of the day, and Don John understood it had to be preserved against vengeance. The Venetians, in particular, remembering Famagusta, wanted to massacre every captured Turk. Don John intervened, not because he had turned merciful in the middle of a blood sea, but because a commander thinking beyond rage understands that victory loses something when it becomes indistinguishable from butchery. He spared some high-value prisoners, including Ali Pasha's sons, and treated them not as screaming trophies, but as political pieces worth more alive than dead. Yet, even in triumph, the strategic picture remained harsher than the Christian world first allowed itself to believe. In Rome, celebration bordered on delirium. Pope Pius V was credited with mystical foreknowledge. Bells rang, cannons fired. Don John became, for a time, the man sent by God. But empires are not destroyed simply because one fleet is. In Istanbul, the first instinct of Selim II was unrestrained rage mass, killing vengeance theological outrage. His Grand Vizier Sokolu Mehmed Pasha saw more clearly. The empire's answer would not be mourning, but industry. Shipyards in the Golden Horn erupted into work. Forests were cut. Hemp replaced. When rope ran short, silk was said to be considered. By the next season, a rebuilt Ottoman fleet of roughly 200 ships was already back on the water. Here, the Grand Vizier's famous line to the Venetian ambassador becomes the coldest postscript to Lepanto, Cyprus, taken from Venice, was an arm cut off. The Ottoman fleet at Lepanto, he said, was only a beard shaved. An arm does not grow back. A beard grows thicker. It was a brilliant line because it contained enough truth to wound victory. The Holy League had won the greatest naval battle of the age. It had not destroyed Ottoman state capacity. This is one reason Lepanto fascinates historians so deeply. In strictly territorial terms, the results were limited. Cyprus was not recovered. The Ottomans remained formidable. The Holy League itself began falling apart almost as soon as the immediate threat receded. Spain and Venice returned to their old mistrust. Don John wanted more. War more, risk more, momentum, perhaps a push toward the heart of Ottoman power. Philip II did not. Money, politics, and strategic caution clipped his brother's wings. In the end, the Christian coalition that had achieved the impossible could not sustain the political unity needed to turn victory into transformation. But to dismiss Lepanto as useless because it did not rewrite the map immediately is to misunderstand what it actually accomplished. It conquered fear. Before Lepanto, the Ottoman naval machine carried an aura of inevitability similar to what the Mongols had once carried on land. After Lepanto, that aura was gone. Europe had seen the giant bleed. Sometimes that is enough to change the future. Not because the enemy disappears, but because the spell does. The personal aftermath is even crueler than the strategic one. Don John, the hero of Christendom, did not become the serene victor of later pageantry. He became dangerous to his own blood. Philip II could tolerate a successful half-brother more easily if the success remained useful and limited. A wildly popular, charismatic bastard with military glamour and the admiration of Europe was another matter. Don John was eventually sent to the Netherlands, one of the worst assignments in the empire, a theater where no clean victory was possible. He died there in 1578, only 31 years old, ravaged by disease, isolated, and politically spent. His body, to be moved safely, was cut apart and transported like luggage through hostile territory. This is one of the most grotesque endings for one of the age's brightest martial stars. The man who had stood at the center of the battle that saved Christian prestige in the Mediterranean ended as dismembered cargo. Cervantes' fate was no gentler. Lepanto destroyed the use of his left hand or arm, ending any realistic military career. Later armed with letters of recommendation from the very great men whose esteem should have saved him, he was captured by Barbary corsairs. Those letters made things worse. The pirates assumed only a high-value noble would carry such endorsements and demanded an enormous ransom. Thus, the very documents proving his heroism condemned him to years of captivity. This is one of history's cruelest literary jokes. The soldier maimed at Lepanto, then imprisoned in Algiers, returned eventually not as celebrated hero, but as poor veteran. Out of that defeat, pain, and humiliation came the man who would write Don Quixote, perhaps the greatest novel in the language of broken ideals ever composed. In that sense, Lepanto did not end when the sea calmed. It entered literature, and the sea did calm. That is one of the final hard truths. Storms cleaned away much of the evidence, bodies sank, timbers drifted, sharks and weather finished what artillery had begun. A few years later, truces replaced sermons of extermination. The map looked less changed than the blood cost suggested it should. Cynics have always seized on that. Yet the cynics miss the essential thing. Lepanto did not need to conquer Istanbul to matter. It needed to prove that the Ottoman fleet could be met broken and driven into the psychology of defeat. It needed to buy time. And in grand history, time is one of the rarest and most valuable forms of victory. On October 7th, 1571, the sea turned red. An empire learned it was mortal. Another civilization learned it did not yet have to kneel, and thousands of men vanished into a story far larger than they could have seen from the decks beneath their feet. That is what survives after the wood rots and the blood washes out. Not the hulls, not the banners. The proof that at least once, when the future looked almost closed, men rode into the wolf's mouth and made the wolf choke.